What's going on, everybody? LK here. Today I want to talk about the 4 phases of a fighting game. So if you watch matches, maybe you watch some of my other videos or any other content creator in the fighting game space's videos, when they talk about how the game is actually going, sometimes maybe they'll use some weird lingo or something. So I just want to break down what this is in general, right? So in my opinion, there are 4 phases in a fighting game. 1 is the neutral phase, 2 is the offense phase, 3 is the defense phase, and 4 is the knockdown phase. So first is the neutral phase. So this is the phase of the game where neither player has a direct advantage over each other, where the other 3 states, offense, defense, and knockdown, one player has some type of advantage over the other player. This is where most of the movement happens and most of the interactions happen between the 2 players. And the biggest problem that people have with neutral and understanding neutral is the wide scope of interactions that can happen because neither player have a heavy advantage in a clear, distinct way. And these interactions vary based on range and movement. So I tend to group them in this way. So this position here is known as the round start position, and that's just because this is the first thing you see when the round begins. Then you have other distances, like this is about half screen, this is about 2/3 of the screen away, and here where you can't scroll the screen back is full screen. So there are cases where the characters can't really interact at that range, so you don't have to think about it that hard. So for example, like Mike and Milia here, neither of them really fight at this range. So essentially here, like, we could be doing stuff, but nothing is really happening. But once we get to around this range, this is where like Biken's pretty strong, but Milia doesn't have that much stuff she can do, because Biken can reach with this and threaten with this, and Milia would have to do something about it. Once you get to around this range, usually both characters definitely have stuff they could do against each other. But then on top of that, not only are we looking at ranges, but we're also looking at phases between the 2 characters. So what do I mean? So the way that I tend to group these are just based on, again, where we are, but from a different perspective. So we have, here is ground versus ground. Why? Because both characters are on the ground. So this would be more of a, what do we do when both characters are trying to do stuff on the ground at the same time? So from there, you can kind of assume what the others are, right? So we have jumping in. So I am jumping at my opponent who's on the ground. Then there's the opposite of anti-air. So my opponent is coming from the air at me who's on the ground. And then last we have air versus air, which is when we are both in the air. So as you can see it, this is like me trying to consolidate it as much as possible. Neutral has a wide variety of interactions that could happen based on where you are on the screen and what each character is doing. And we haven't even gone into like actual tools versus tools. So you can see why neutral is hard for people to understand. There's just a lot you have to keep track of, and games are pretty fast. So next is the fun one. So next we have block string offense. I'm specifying block string offense. Usually I say offense, but I'm specifying block string offense because this means you caught your opponent. So here you have, depending on your character, anywhere from a small advantage to a big advantage. You are rushing your opponent down with offense. Of course, this will depend on like executional difficulty of your character, but the main thing is that it is really easy to practice this because it's way less ambiguous than something like neutral. So the problem you're trying to solve in the offensive phase is actually getting hits on your opponent. And it's kind of a 2-step problem. It's what are you going to do to your opponent and what can they do about what you're doing. And for the second one, it's of course, what can the player do and what can their character do. There are all sorts of different types of offense that you can do. Some have like pretty clear responses, like going for like throw setups. There's a lot of ways you can respond to things like throw. You can reject the throw. You can mash them before the throw comes. You can jump out of the throw. You can backdash out of the throw. There's a lot of things you could do where there might be some sequences where there's not really anything you can do besides just trying to defend and get to the next part. This is a pretty good example. Milia has an instant overhead, and she could do it from block stun, so I can't even move. So if I don't have a resource and she gets that move off, then I just have to guess. Again, I kind of think this is the easiest phase of the game because you can just practice this. It's your character doing stuff, so you can practice it, you can see what other people do, you can see what's effective for you, and it's a pretty accessible way to just win a game. Then you have the opposite, so then you have block string defense. So this is when you're defending against your opponent's offense. So most people don't like this part of the game very much. And in my opinion, this is much harder than offense. So the main problem with defense is that you need to know what your opponent's character can do and what you can do about it. So it's way easier for you to know what your character is doing to your opponent. Maybe you know what they can do about it, maybe not. To be honest, you do have to be at a certain level of the game to like care what your opponent, care is probably the wrong word, but you have to be a certain level at the game to know all of your opponent's responses to what you're doing. Also care, honestly, also care. But on defense, you need to know what your opponent is doing to you and how to respond. And on top of that, you need to know how to deal with both ideal offensive situations and some optimal choices from your opponent as well. It turns out, honestly, that your opponent can do whatever they want when they're attacking you. So, for example, I showed this a little while ago. There's two options Melia can take here. She can do a slightly delayed low or this overhead. You can't really do anything about it. But off this normal, let's say for funsies, they just do this, just cause. For a common Melia player's offense, you don't really want to do this that much. It's already pretty hard to like push your turn with Melia as far as block string specifically. So at the bare minimum, you wouldn't want to get hit after this happened, even though you're looking for both this and this. Furthermore, you have to look at resources as well. So the thing I showed you before, this sequence, right? This instant overhead, so I can't react to it. When she has 50 meter, she can follow up with a bunch of either another overhead. If she hits you, she gets a combo. If you block, she could do another mix-up, things like that. When she doesn't have meter, this move is very punishable when she does not have meter. So you could argue that it's a pretty risky choice when she doesn't have resource, but still something you kind of have to look out for. So that's just examples of both like ideal choices that you expect people to go for because it's strong, but then also both risky things and then also arguably suboptimal choices. Then the last is knockdown, and knockdown can appear in many forms. So this is when you have the opportunity to get a very large advantage that is not just blocking. Depending on the game, when you catch someone blocking, you just have advantage in that you're on them and you're pressuring them, but the numbers don't necessarily lead to like a big advantage. Your biggest advantage comes from knockdown situations. So either things like throwing them or getting a nice knockdown. In Melia's case, she has this 2k2d, for example. You can create situations where it could be extremely difficult for the opponent to defend or even interact, period. This can be really, really important and game deciding. The main problem that people have with knockdowns is what do you do with all that time? There's a bunch of simple things that basically all characters in fighting games can do. For example, the safe jump. We call this the safe jump because it is safe against reversals, just like this. So if she did not do it, then I get to keep my offense. If she does do it, then I'm safe. But depending on your character, you might have some like unique situations or something that other characters can't do. For a lot of characters, your goal is to come up with a situation where you can attack safely, and then if you're successful with whatever you're going, you can repeat the situation. So say you're biking and you get this situation. The nice thing about this is that you go into another situation with resource, which means you have a very, very strong following offensive situation. So usually this phase is taking a strong situation, finding a way to hit somebody, and trying to lead it to another advantageous situation, if possible. This, of course, depends on the game. So hopefully that all made sense. I definitely have mentioned this in passing in other videos, so I wanted this video here just half for new players, half for people who are wondering like, oh, what are these? Like, why does it keep mentioning these over and over? As usual, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Like and subscribe if you guys feel like it, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.